In 1999, 3 canoeists launched into the waters of a Highland loch. By evening, none returned. Search teams combed the shoreline. Sonar swept beneath the surface, and helicopters hovered through rain. Nothing surfaced, except a single wooden oar, drifting aimlessly in the waves. Families held funerals with empty coffins. Police sealed the evidence room and declared the case closed. For years, the oar sat tagged and numbered, mute in its box. Then, a decade later, an intake form from a border hospital noted a patient with hypothermia scars, salt burns, and a missing history since 1999. The handwriting on the admission log matched the name of one who had been presumed drowned. The case file, once frozen, cracked open with the weight of a living voice. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The Northern Highlands in the summer of 1999 carried a silence that was deceptive. At dawn, Loch Varne stretched like glass, a pale reflection of overcast skies. By noon, the wind had picked up, carrying the damp chill of the surrounding moors. At 3 p.m., 3 canoeists launched from the southern slipway. The craft, painted red, cut a sharp outline against the gray water. Man 124, lean from years of rowing on university teams, steadied himself at the stern. His grip on the oar was precise, practiced, his posture upright. Beside him, Man 2, 25, broader in build, shifted a pack of provisions under his knees and muttered something about the clouds. At the bow, Woman 123 tightened the strap of a rucksack across her chest. She had insisted on carrying maps and a compass, though the loch was familiar ground to locals. Witnesses stood on this pier and noted their departure. One fisherman recorded it in his personal logbook. 3 canoeists, red craft, departed South Pier 3 p.m. Weather unsettled. That line, scrawled in hurried ink, would later appear as Exhibit 4 in the case file. By 4 p.m., the sky darkened further. A marine weather station at the western edge of the loch logged wind speeds increasing from 8 knots to 20 within the hour. At 4:15 p.m., raindrops struck in sheets, flattening reeds along the bank. Villagers recalled hearing the storm warnings broadcast on local radio. The bulletin was archived. Small craft advisory, strong gusts, visibility reduced. When 6 p.m. arrived, and no canoe returned, alarm spread quickly. Woman 2, a police constable in her early 30s, answered the first call at the station. She logged the complaint into the official incident record. 6:12 p.m., 3 persons overdue, last visual 3 p.m., craft red. Search and rescue volunteers assembled by 7 p.m. Lanterns burned along the shoreline as boats launched in formation. The search grid, hastily drawn on waterproof paper, divided the loch into 6 sectors. Copies of the grid were signed and time-stamped at 7:18 p.m. A volunteer, Man 3, held the radio and called out coordinates as each boat advanced. From above, a helicopter hovered low, its spotlight cutting across black water churned by the storm. The flight log later captured the frustration of the crew. 1942 hours, negative visual, white caps obscuring small craft. At 9 p.m., a radio crackled with the first trace of evidence. A patrol boat had retrieved an object near the western reeds. The crew secured it with a gaff and lifted it on deck. The beam of a flashlight revealed the sodden wood of a single oar. The blade was scuffed, its edge showing linear abrasions consistent with rock or hull impact. The oar was placed inside a transparent evidence bag. Photographs were taken under flash, the numbers stenciled on its shaft still faintly visible. Woman 2 signed the chain of custody form, 2117, 1 oar, wooden serial mark legible, logged. The document, now brittle with age, remains the earliest physical record. Families were notified before midnight. At the village hall, officials pinned the first photograph of the recovered oar to a corkboard. Beneath it, an evidence slip marked in black ink. Case number 1999-174. Mothers and fathers pressed forward, searching the blurred frame for meaning. Nothing else had been found. No canoe, no life jackets, no clothing. Only a single oar. By 1 a.m., search operations were suspended due to weather. Teams retreated, soaked and exhausted. The log closed with a final entry, 0104 hours. Search terminated, will resume daylight. The oar remained, bagged, tagged, sealed. Only one oar floated on the dark water. At dawn on July 15, 1999, the second day of the search began. The storm had broken during the night, but the loch still heaved under the weight of the passing weather. Mist clung to the hillsides, dripping from pine branches, while the water itself rolled with the sluggish rhythm of retreating waves. The air smelled of diesel and wet earth as volunteers gathered once more at the slipway. A makeshift command tent had been erected beside the pier. Inside, the incident board stood upright, a plywood frame with waterproof sheets taped across its face. Black lines divided Loch Varne into 6 sectors, each numbered in thick marker. Woman 2, the constable assigned as liaison, initialed the sheet at 6:12 a.m. Her handwriting, neat and compressed, indicated responsibility for the day's operations. By 6:30 a.m., the first boat launched. Man 3, the volunteer leader, wore a faded life vest over a waterproof jacket. He carried the radio handset clipped to his chest and spoke in clipped, formal tones. Sector 1, clear. Visibility 20 yards. Negative sighting. His voice, relayed through static, was recorded word for word by a police clerk at the command desk. Each transmission bore a timestamp precise to the minute. Later, these handwritten logs, water-spotted but legible, would be preserved in the archive. At 7:45 a.m., Woman 2 opened the evidence container holding the single oar. A transparent box with blue clasps. It had been set aside on a folding table. She checked the integrity of the seal, confirmed the evidence tag was still intact, then re-signed the chain of custody slip. The entry read, 0745 hours, inspection complete, seal intact. A second officer countersigned. The box was closed again. The oar left lying silent under plastic. Search efforts widened. By 9 a.m., 3 boats moved in formation across the northern reach. The surface was choppy, the waves slapping hulls hard enough to throw spray into the air. Binoculars swept the gray expanse, focusing on any floating debris. At one point, Man 3 reported sighting a dark shape at the waterline. Crews converged, but it proved to be driftwood. The report was still logged, marked with the note, false return. At 9:30 a.m., the helicopter rejoined the operation. Its rotors thundered above the loch as the crew scanned with a mounted spotlight. The flight log, later catalogued as Exhibit 19, detailed headings, altitudes, and repeated negative returns. 0932 hours, sweep northern coves, negative. 0945 hours, sweep midline sector 4, negative. Each entry reflected the persistence of method, yet also the emptiness of result. By 11 a.m., divers entered the loch near the western reeds. Wearing heavy suits, they descended into water where visibility dropped to less than a meter. Each diver carried a plastic slate with pencil, writing notes by touch. Their logs were later transcribed. Depth 6 m. Bottom silt. No debris, no craft. Negative. They surfaced shivering, masks fogged, reporting only the feel of weeds and cold rock. On shore, families gathered in silence. Woman 3, the mother of Man 1, stood wrapped in a dark coat, her eyes locked on the horizon. Man 4, father of Man 2, moved restlessly, hands clasping and unclasping as if searching for something to hold. Their presence was documented in a press officer's field notes. Relatives on site, observing. No statements offered. By midday, shore patrols began. Volunteers walked the muddy banks, searching for signs washed up overnight. Notebooks filled with sketches of footprints, some animal, some human, but blurred in the mud, were later collected and sealed in plastic sleeves. Forensic analysts eventually dismissed the prints as inconclusive, yet the records remain in supplemental file 1999-174A. At 2 p.m., the command tent filled with damp air and the smell of gasoline heaters. Woman 2 updated the board, marking cleared grids with slashes of blue marker. Sectors 1, 2, and 3, negative. 4 partially complete, 5 and 6 pending. Volunteers cycled back to shore, faces drawn, clothes soaked through despite waterproof gear. Coffee was poured into paper cups, hands wrapped tight around them for warmth. By late afternoon, fatigue set in. The repetition of negative reports, the steady ticking of logs, and the absence of new evidence carved a sense of futility. Still, procedure dictated the effort continue. At 4:45 p.m., sonar equipment was lowered into the loch from the northern patrol boat. Its display flickered with static and shifting shadows. Operators recorded coordinates of minor anomalies, each marked as to be rechecked. None matched the shape or mass of a canoe. At 5 p.m., Man 3 made the final transmission. Search suspended due to weather deterioration. Negative results. The words were logged, underlined twice by the clerk as if to emphasize closure. Crews hauled boats back onto trailers. Lanterns were extinguished one by one. The command board, its corners warped with water, was carried back into storage. The day's record ended at 7 p.m., with no recovery beyond the single oar. The search logs ended in silence at 7 p.m. By the third day, the case shifted from frantic rescue toward grim expectation. At sunrise, the village hall served as the coordination center. The air inside was heavy with damp coats, mud tracked across the floor, and the constant rasp of radios discharging static. The incident board stood against the wall, marked with layers of ink from the past 48 hours. Blue slashes, black circles, and red arrows told the story of grids already cleared and zones marked for re-examination. Families began to arrive in greater numbers. Woman 3, mother of Man 1, entered quietly and stood before the board. She traced the red circle around Sector 5 with her finger, lips pressed tight. Man 4, father of Man 2, demanded details from a tired officer, his voice rising. "You found nothing but a stick?" The reply, cold and procedural, was that the object recovered was not a stick, but a registered oar, bagged, sealed, and filed. The oar had been moved from the pier to the evidence board. A large photographic enlargement was pinned at the center. Flash had caught droplets clinging to the blade, and the serial number on the shaft, faint but legible, appeared beneath in magnified detail. An evidence slip, tagged Case 1999-174, hung below it. The single image dominated the wall of missing posters, maps, and dive logs. At 10:03 a.m., a detective sergeant opened the official evidence box. Chain of custody was updated, logged by signature and timestamp. The entry line read, 10:03, verification of evidence photograph, seal intact. Witnesses watched in silence as the box was resealed, the oar once again disappearing from view. Its absence seemed louder than its presence. A weight felt across the room. Search operations continued outside. Patrol boats launched again, though weather reports warned of further storms in the evening. A sonar printout was delivered to the hall, showing irregular contours at depth. Volunteers clustered around it, debating whether the shadow could be a submerged craft. The technician dismissed it. Rock formation, consistent with previous charts. The sheet was pinned beside the oar photograph, another negative finding. By 1 p.m., hope frayed. Relatives pressed for expanded search perimeters. A request for dogs to track scent along the banks was noted, but rain had washed the ground clean. One handler later wrote in his report, "Conditions unsuitable for trace detection, scent diluted." That line, clipped and final, was stapled into the file. Late afternoon brought exhaustion. Inside the hall, families sat in folding chairs, staring at the board. The sound of dripping rain outside filled the pauses between radio calls. The image of the oar, magnified and ringed in red, stared back at them like a cold accusation. Woman 3 whispered, "It's all we have." Her words were not recorded in any transcript, but multiple witnesses remembered them later. By 6 p.m., the official status shifted from rescue to presumed recovery. A memo was typed on government letterhead, declaring that continued operations were unlikely to locate survivors. The language was clinical. All persons presumed deceased unless further evidence suggests otherwise. The memo was clipped to the board beneath the oar photograph. As the hall emptied, the lights dimmed. The evidence board remained. Its centerpiece, the single object that defined the case. Photocopied maps and logs curled at the edges in the damp air. Officers left the ore image exposed overnight, taped so firmly it tore the cork beneath. The board showed one object, circled in red ink. 2 weeks after the canoeists vanished, the village stood subdued. The loch still bore the marks of the storm. Reeds bent flat, branches scattered along the banks, mud slicking the shoreline where volunteers had marched day after day. Search teams had withdrawn. Radios lay silent. Boats trailered and parked in rows, their hulls scarred by repeated launches. What remained was paperwork, silence, and families waiting for closure that would not arrive. At the district police office, a final report was typed in triplicate. The words were clinical. Search exhausted. No further lines of inquiry. Persons presumed deceased. Attached was the chain of custody form for the ore, confirming its transfer into long-term evidence storage. The slip bore multiple signatures, woman 2 among them, and the official time, 3:45 p.m. The object was boxed, barcoded, and shelved in a climate-controlled room. Its location was recorded as Shelf 14B. Meanwhile, the families prepared funerals without bodies. Coffins were ordered, lighter than expected, their interiors lined with plain white cloth. The parish priest met with relatives to plan a service that could only gesture toward absence. On the morning of the funeral, villagers gathered in heavy coats beneath slate-gray clouds. Bells tolled across the valley. Inside the church, 3 coffins stood at the altar. The lids were closed, each draped with a folded jacket or shirt belonging to the missing. No remains lay within. Police officers sat at the back, silent, while the priest read verses that spoke of water, loss, and waiting. Woman 3 clutched a photograph of her son, its edges worn from handling. Man 4 stared ahead, hands pressed together until his knuckles whitened. A log from the parish records later captured the oddity. Burials without remains. Families consented. Personal effects enclosed. The clothes inside the coffins were tagged and numbered by police before being released. Even in grief, chain of custody persisted. Receipts listed the items transferred. 1 jacket, 1 shirt, 1 scarf. Each note ended with the same phrase, released to next of kin. Photographers captured the procession leaving the church. Rain had begun again, thin drops striking the ground like static. The coffins were lowered into earth. Soil thudded against empty wood. The ore, locked miles away on a shelf, remained the only tangible fragment of the disappearance. In the weeks that followed, officials closed the file to active investigation. A final memo, stamped and signed, noted, "Case concluded, absent new evidence." Yet on the bulletin board in the village hall, a single photocopy remained taped in place. It showed the ore inside its evidence bag, droplets frozen by flash. Someone had circled it in red pen, a mark still visible beneath curling tape. The coffins lay quiet. Inside, nothing but folded clothes, tagged and numbered. By the summer of 2000, the loch had grown quiet again. Tourists returned with cameras. Anglers cast lines from the banks, and the story of the vanished canoeists slipped into rumor. Officially, the case had been closed for almost a year. In the district records office, shelves stacked with boxes bore barcodes and catalog numbers. One of those, marked 1999-174, contained the only surviving object of the disappearance, the ore. Its journey through the system left a trail of signatures. In March 2000, the county evidence supervisor requested consolidation of multiple small-town lockers into a central facility. Paperwork showed the transfer of 33 items from the village station. Among them, 1 wooden oar, water damaged. A chain of custody receipt listed the time as 2:14 p.m. Woman 2 initialed the line, acknowledging release. A courier signed the next, confirming receipt at the regional evidence warehouse 70 kilometers away. There, the ore was recatalogued. A new tag was issued, printed on synthetic card, resistant to moisture. Its number differed from the original, a change that confused later researchers. The receipt recorded, "Object reassigned under Code 2002-21. The note ended with a line in small type. Previous case link maintained. While the object settled into archival silence, the families continued their rituals. Woman 3 visited the loch weekly, standing at the pier where her son had last been seen. Sometimes she placed flowers in the water, watching them drift until they vanished into ripples. Man 4 wrote letters to local officials demanding further searches. Copies of his correspondence were eventually added to the file, stamped with "received," but never answered. At home, photographs of the missing were pinned to walls. Some families lit candles nightly. Others collected newspaper clippings, creating scrapbooks that documented not progress, but the lack of it. The single oar reappeared in each clipping, first as a blurred photograph from the night it was found, later as a detail in anniversary articles. It became a symbol not just of absence, but of failure. In 2001, a regional audit of evidence rooms required physical verification of stored items. Inspectors opened the sealed box, compared the oar's serial markings against photographs, then resealed it. Their notes were dry. Conditions stable, evidence intact, returned to shelf. Yet the accompanying photograph captured a film of dust across the plastic lid, evidence not of crime, but of time passing unchallenged. Meanwhile, the community grew restless. Locals whispered about the storm, suggesting the canoeists had reached shore and wandered into the forest. Others insisted the loch held secrets at its deepest points, currents that dragged objects down forever. Each theory was repeated in pubs and markets, but none left a trace on official paper. By 2002, the case was spoken of less often, but the oar remained, locked away, its tag reissued, its place fixed on a shelf. A receipt logged its movement, the last notation in 3 years of silence. The handwriting was sharp, precise. Received. Shelf 22D, seal intact. No further notes followed. A receipt logged the oar, moved but never opened. In the spring of 2002, a new fragment surfaced. It came not from the water, but from memory. A fisherman, Man 5, walked into the district station with a folded sheet of paper. His handwriting, uneven from years of manual labor, described what he claimed to have seen on the night the canoeist disappeared. According to his account, while rain hammered the loch and rescue boats swept the surface, he had noticed a flicker of light on the northern tree line, too steady to be lightning, too isolated to belong to any house. He marked the time in his note, 10:45 p.m. The statement was logged by a duty officer and stapled into the dormant case file. Procedure required comparison of handwriting samples to verify authenticity. A forensic analyst later tested the ink, confirming it was contemporary with 2002. The signature matched prior licenses and fishing permits. The statement was genuine, but its implications were vague. A fire on the shoreline suggested survival, yet no trace had ever been found in that area. Investigators drove to the northern tree line weeks later, searching for signs. The ground was boggy, pines dense and tangled. Soil samples were taken where Man 5 indicated, placed in vials, and sent for analysis. The report returned with a flat conclusion. Organic ash detected, indeterminate origin, no accelerant. The possibility of a campfire was acknowledged, but no human remains or artifacts were recovered. The oar reappeared in this phase of inquiry. A photograph of the evidence board shows the fisherman's statement pinned beside the enlarged image of the oar. Red string connected them in an effort to visualize links. A single object floating on the loch. A single fire burning in the woods. The symbolism was unintentional, but haunting. For the families, the statement brought a flicker of hope. Woman 3 pressed investigators to reopen active searches, convinced the light proved her son had reached shore. Officials demurred, citing resource limits. Instead, the file was updated with the new testimony, a fresh label affixed. Supplemental Witness Report. In the following months, rumors spread through the village. Some believed the canoeists had been rescued by a stranger and hidden. Others whispered of hermits living in the forest, people unseen who might have offered shelter. Theories multiplied, none supported by physical evidence. By winter, the statement had settled into obscurity. It remained stapled inside the file, authenticated but unexplored. In the evidence log, a single note was added in 2002. Reviewed. No actionable leads. The handwriting slanted, hurried, as if the officer wanted the matter closed. The statement was filed, stamped, and forgotten. By 2005, 6 years had passed. The loch no longer carried the urgency of a crime scene. Canoes and fishing boats cut across its surface again, tourists photographing the peaks that ringed the water. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the official file remained open at a low level, waiting for something new. That year, the something came from beneath the surface. A geological survey team contracted to map the loch for environmental studies deployed side-scan sonar. Their equipment swept wide arcs, translating the floor into shifting patterns of light and shadow on printed film. At 11:45 a.m. on May 14th, the operator, Man 6, noted an anomaly. The sonar sheet displayed an elongated shape, darker than the silt and rock around it. Its dimensions roughly matched those of a canoe. The team flagged the coordinates and filed a formal report. Copies were delivered to the district police and archived. The report included 3 sonar plates, each annotated with grease pencil. The words, "Possible wreck," were circled in red. Excitement spread quickly. For the first time in years, there was physical evidence hinting at the missing craft. Divers were dispatched the following week. Their descent was logged in meticulous detail. Depth 18 mem, visibility 0.5 mem. Bottom composition, rock, mud. They groped through the murk with gloved hands, tracing the anomaly. What they found was not fiberglass, but stone. The shape on the sonar was a natural formation, slabs of rock aligned in a way that mimicked a hull. The disappointment was recorded bluntly in the dive log. Negative for man-made object. Yet the sonar plates remained in the file, stapled beside the photographs of the ore. Someone had pinned a hand-drawn sketch of the anomaly next to the enlarged ore image on the evidence board. 2 echoes, both suggestive, neither conclusive. For families, the false lead reopened old wounds. Woman 3 attended the meeting where the findings were presented. She clutched a copy of the sonar sheet, her eyes fixed on the red circle. "It looks like a boat," she whispered. The officers responded with technical terms about sediment and shadows. Their words carried no comfort. The media seized briefly on the development. Headlines in local papers proclaimed, "Possible canoe found in loch." Days later, the correction appeared in smaller print. "Survey identifies rock formation." The story faded again, leaving the same object at the center, the ore, locked in its box, silent and unchanging. The sonar printout survived, sealed in plastic, filed as Exhibit 44. It bore the annotation of Man 6 in blunt pencil, shape at 18 mem to be confirmed. That confirmation never came. To be, the printout showed a shape, but no confirmation. In 2008, nearly a decade after the disappearance, the case shifted again. Not through new forensic discovery, but through attention. A regional newspaper assigned Woman 4, a journalist in her early 40s, to revisit the vanished canoeists. She began by filing requests for access to police records, combing through redacted logs and photographs. What emerged in her article was not new evidence, but the stark emptiness of what had been preserved. Her story opened with the image of the ore. She described it as a mute witness, sealed and shelved, its surface still bearing the scars of water and stone. Accompanying the article was a photograph obtained through the Freedom of Information process. The picture showed the ore inside its plastic container, clasps fastened, a thick film of dust covering the lid. The blue evidence tag was still visible, but the handwriting had faded, its ink turning brown with age. Readers reacted strongly. Letters poured into the newspaper, some demanding renewed searches, others condemning the authorities for declaring deaths without bodies. The photograph of the ore, repeated across headlines, became a symbol. For many, it was proof not of survival or death, but of official indifference. Police issued a press statement in response. It reiterated the findings of 1999 and denied negligence. The statement cited weather logs, sonar surveys, diver reports, and the absence of any physical remains. Yet the imagery of the oar overshadowed their words. Woman 4's article clipped through bureaucratic detachment with the weight of a single object. The journalist pressed further. She interviewed villagers who recalled the search, parents who remembered the empty coffins, and Man 5, the fisherman who had reported a light on the tree line. His words were quoted, "I saw fire, steady as a lantern, but no one listened." The quote, juxtaposed beside the dusty oar photograph, created tension that no report could neutralize. By autumn, the article was syndicated to national outlets. For the first time in years, the case returned to headlines. Archive footage of search boats and helicopters replayed on television. Families were interviewed again, their grief sharpened by renewed scrutiny. Woman 3 appeared briefly on camera, holding a framed photograph of her son. Behind her, on the kitchen wall, hung a newspaper clipping of the oar. Inside the evidence room, nothing changed. The oar remained sealed. Shelf location noted as 22D. Chain of custody confirmed it had not been opened since 2001. Yet the external pressure forced officials to conduct a perfunctory review. A memo from 2008 recorded, "Item inspected, condition unchanged, returned to storage." Even that note, clinical and short, could not erase the image of dust. Woman 4's final article in the series ended with a line that would be quoted for years. Cases collapsed not only from lack of evidence, but from forgetting what was already found. The photograph revealed dust sealing the evidence box. By 2010, the file seemed destined to sink back into obscurity. The newspaper cycle had moved on. The families had settled into rituals of silence, and the oar remained shelved, its dust undisturbed. Then, in April of that year, a man walked into the rural police post carrying nothing but a battered tape recorder and a story. Man 7, a forestry worker, claimed he had seen someone in the woods north of the loch. He described an encounter years earlier, in 2004, when he stumbled on a figure near a ruined bothy. The man was thin, bearded, and spoke little, but when pressed, whispered a name, the same name listed on the death certificate of one of the canoeists. At the time, Man 7 dismissed it as imagination, but the newspaper articles from 2008, especially the photograph of the oar, stirred his memory. Now, he wanted his account preserved. Investigators recorded his statement. The tape began at 10:03 a.m., the sergeant noting time and date aloud. Man 7's voice, gravelly and hesitant, described the encounter in fragmented detail. A fire lit against the stone wall, the smell of smoke, the sound of water dripping from the roof beams. He said the man avoided eye contact, but when asked his name, whispered it clearly. The tape captured the word, faint but audible. Forensic technicians reviewed the audio. Spectrogram analysis confirmed the recording was authentic, without evidence of tampering. Handwriting from Man 7's signed deposition was compared against prior forestry employment records and matched. His credibility was logged as medium to high. Still, the absence of physical evidence, no photograph, no artifact, no follow-up, made the report fragile. In the case file, the new testimony was added to the evidence board. A photocopy of the tape's label, white sticker, black marker, was pinned beside the oar photograph. Someone sketched the outline of a cassette and drew a line of red string connecting it to the enlarged image of the oar. Two fragments, separated by a decade, now suggested survival. The families received the news with conflicted relief. Woman 3 clutched the transcript, her hands trembling. She read and reread the faint line where the name appeared. Officials, however, cautioned restraint. They described the account as anecdotal, unlikely to alter the official finding of presumed death. But the tape remained. Its final seconds contained the words of Man 7, "He is alive." The voice on the recording, almost swallowed by static, carried through the silence of the archive. On tape, a voice whispered, "He is alive." In early 2012, the silence broke. A border hospital near the Highlands admitted a patient found wandering along a rural track, dehydrated, hypothermic, and unresponsive to questions. He was brought in by paramedics at 6:45 a.m., shivering beneath a foil blanket. His clothes were torn, his boots disintegrating with age. The triage nurse entered the intake details by hand. Male, mid-30s, no identification, incoherent. Yet when pressed for his name, the man whispered one that matched the death certificate issued in 1999. The hospital log preserved every detail. The EMS run sheet noted, patient presenting with prolonged exposure, severe malnutrition, multiple old scars consistent with cold injury. His pulse was weak, his skin mottled from years of environmental damage. Blood tests showed deficiencies typical of long-term deprivation. Radiographs revealed healed fractures never treated in hospital. The clinical portrait was of someone who had survived on the margins for years. Authorities were alerted immediately. Woman 2, now promoted, arrived at the ward to witness the identification. She compared the man's features against the photograph archived in 1999. Despite the beard, the sunken cheeks, and the altered expression, key identifiers matched. Dental patterns, scar on left forearm, mole near the jawline. A formal dental comparison was ordered. Records from the university clinic, dated before 1999, were pulled. The match was confirmed within hours. The ore resurfaced at this moment. Inside the evidence room, staff retrieved the box and photographed it again, placing the image beside the medical file. Though the object itself had not changed, its meaning had. It was no longer a relic of presumed death, but a witness to survival. The patient, man 1, remained under observation for days. He spoke little, often staring at the ceiling, blinking at the fluorescent light. Nurses recorded fragmented words: trees, water, cold. When asked about the loch, he turned his face away. Yet his reappearance forced a reclassification of the entire case. The coroner rescinded the death certificate. Police reopened the file. Media descended quickly. Headlines proclaimed, "Canoeist found alive after 13 years." Photographs of the hospital exterior appeared in newspapers, alongside the same ore image that had haunted the story since 1999. Families were contacted, stunned into disbelief. Woman 3 traveled to the hospital, clutching the clipping of the ore photograph, as if the object had foreseen the return. Doctors issued guarded statements. They described the patient as stable but fragile, his memory fractured, his physical condition the result of extended deprivation. Psychiatric assessments warned of possible trauma-related silence. Yet every clinical sheet, every note, every log reinforced the same undeniable fact: he was alive. The intake form listed the details in block letters. One line, written by the admitting nurse, carried the weight of the years. Subject name corresponds to missing person, presumed drowned 1999. Intake form noted: salt burns, prolonged malnutrition, hypothermia scars. Over the weeks that followed, interviews began in controlled conditions. Police established a secure room at the hospital, its walls bare except for a mounted clock. Every session was recorded on both audio and video. Man 1 sat at the table, posture slouched, hands trembling slightly as he spoke. His voice was low, often pausing, but his words formed a fractured narrative of survival. The first transcript, logged at 2:15 p.m., opened with questions about the canoe. He described heavy rain, waves striking the craft broadside, and the sudden capsizing. He remembered the others shouting, then silence. He said he clung to debris, paddling with bare hands toward a dim shoreline. What he reached was not safety, but a forest line, wet ground, and no lights. He spoke of wandering through the night, disoriented, soaked, and cold. He found shelter in a ruined stone bothy, roof collapsed but walls still standing. There, he scraped together fire with damp wood. His testimony aligned with Man 5's 2002 statement about a light on the tree line. Investigators pinned the transcript beside the old witness sheet, connecting a decade's distance with one detail: flame. Medical files confirmed his account indirectly. Scars across his legs matched untreated lacerations from sharp rock. His teeth showed enamel wear consistent with years of poor diet. Blood work reflected malnutrition markers that could not be fabricated. He explained, haltingly, that he survived through hunting, foraging, and occasional help from a man he met deep in the woods. Man 8, a hermit who lived apart from society. This figure, shadowed in testimony, had shared food and shelter. No official record existed of him, but several locals recalled rumors of an old wanderer avoiding contact. The detail was logged, but unverified. Investigators pressed him about the years unaccounted for. Man 1's responses were broken, fragmented by silence. He described winters of near starvation, springs of sudden abundance, and summers filled with insects and isolation. He recalled marking days by scratching lines into wood, though he had none to show. Asked why he never returned to the village, he shook his head, eyes fixed on the table. Forensic anchors were layered across the testimony. Dental comparison confirmed identity. Blood samples matched pre-1999 university records. A scar on his left forearm aligned with medical charts from a childhood injury. Each verification narrowed doubt. The oar re-entered his story. When investigators showed him the photograph, his hands twitched. He whispered the word oar, as if naming a wound. He said he remembered gripping it until exhaustion forced him to release it. That detail, absent from all previous files, bound the survivor to the single artifact that had defined the case. The final page of the transcript ended abruptly. Man 1's last recorded word was oar. Transcript ended with one word, oar. The reopening of the case unfolded with the precision of bureaucracy jolted awake. Files once archived were carried back onto desks. The oar, sealed since 2001, was retrieved from its shelf. Its box was wiped clean of dust, resealed photographs taken under bright forensic lamps. Technicians compared the serial markings again, confirming continuity with the chain of custody. A new entry line was added. 2012, item reassessed following survivor identification. Court officials prepared the paperwork to rescind the death certificate. The language was blunt. Certificate annulled. Subject confirmed alive. It marked one of the rare reversals in district records. Families attended hearings where officials spoke in legal tones, though emotion hung thick in the room. Woman 3 wept silently as the order was read, her hands wrapped around the same clipping of the oar photograph she had carried for years. Man 1 sat at the center of this process, his presence reshaping everything. Medical testimony confirmed his identity beyond reasonable doubt. His fractured statements reframed the case file, not as a drowning, but as survival stretched across 13 years. Investigators logged each interview, noting corroborations with weather reports, SAR grid coordinates, and the unexplained witness light. His survival narrative forced authorities to admit oversight. Evidence that had once seemed irrelevant, the fisherman's statement, the anomalous ash sample, suddenly aligned. The hermit, Man 8, remained a spectral figure. Teams searched the forests but found only collapsed shelters, empty fire pits, and scattered tools rusted by rain. Soil samples were collected from one site. Analysis confirmed traces of long-term habitation, ash layered deep in the ground. Yet no living witness emerged. The file recorded this absence with clinical detachment. Unverified cohabitant, presumed deceased or relocated. Media coverage intensified. Cameras filmed the survivor leaving the hospital, stepping slowly into daylight. Headlines paired his image with the oar, still framed as the central symbol. The object that waited, one caption read. Across newsprint, the oar appeared again and again, proof of both loss and return. When the case formally closed in 2013, the final act was procedural. Evidence catalogs were updated, and the oar was officially released from state custody. A receipt documented the transfer. Item returned to family. Case concluded. The signature line bore Woman 3's name, written carefully in ink. In her kitchen, the oar lay across a table, its blade scarred, its shaft dulled. It carried 13 years of weight. Photographs show it tagged one last time, evidence no longer for court but for memory. The oar lay across the table, tagged one last time.